Right, that's enough intro. You can both unmute yourselves. We're live. Sammy, you've got a bit of feedback in the background. We're live. This isn't one of our podcast episodes. We're a little bit unprepared, right? So we just thought we'd stream for an hour, discuss what was going on. We couldn't decide whether we were going to have a Twitter space or do this. So we've just done this at the very last minute. So if you're joining us, welcome to the show. I can see there's a few people in the chat already. So thanks for joining us at such short notice. Literally just tweeted out the episode and pressed go live. So welcome to the show. Lads, introduce yourselves.
Sammy.
Oh, hello everyone. Tom is awake this time.
He's awake
Tom
all the
is
time.
always fucking awake.
This joke's
I'm
one
sick
thing.
of this bullshit, Sammy.
Yeah.
Crossing my red lines, and we all know what happens when you cross red lines the past 2 weeks. You know.
Right, anyway. Enough bullying Tom, Sammy. Say hello.
Hello everyone.
Nice. Hello, Tom. Welcome. Thanks for getting up, right?
Aye.
What time
I
is
see
it for you?
Theo in the chat. It's 6:30 in the morning.
Theo's in the chat, is he? What's he saying?
His name is Ukraine Invasion Masturbator.
Nice. Nice. Theo, that's probably your best username yet. So.
Yeah, it's my all-time favourite.
He says, "How's the war going?" The war's going all right, right? The war.
Yeah, I mean, I think the major kind of objectives that the Russian side is pursuing are being accomplished.
Hold on. Have we did the last time we stream? Had it just started? The last time we streamed?
I seem to recall the last stream we had. I can't remember whether it was the one before this or the. I can't remember whether it was the last one or the one before, but I seem to. Oh, hello, Doug is here. Hello.
Oh, nice. He's muted. Is it?
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah. What was I saying? I seem to recall it was either the previous stream or the one before that, where me and you were discussing whether the quote-unquote invasion was going to happen, and you didn't think it was going to happen, and I said I think it will. I don't know whether that was last week or the last episode or the episode before.
I'm still gonna claim to be correct on that though, because I still don't.
I mean, yeah,
invasion, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, like we were talking about the military activity, and like it was still very kind of on the wall as to whether it was going to go forward.
I think actually we'd streamed on the day it started, I believe.
Did we?
Yeah, I think we.
Oh, I see. It was last week was the thingy episode, wasn't it? The on imperialism.
We didn't do that we missed that last week, but we streamed the week this kicked off, I believe. Anyway, how's the war going? Well, to begin with, it's actually technically not a war, right? It's
special military operation.
I believe Ukraine. Yeah, well, it's. I don't think Russia have declared it a military operation, and the Ukraine still hasn't declared war on Russia. I believe on the demands of the US, because obviously certain economic things happen when war's declared, which are being withheld from happening, so to speak, right?
I think as well, I think it has to. I don't think you can unilaterally declare war either. I think it has to be done through UN procedures for it to be an official declaration, which is why the USA never declared war on Iraq, I believe. I think they called it a peacekeeping operation. I don't think there was ever a formal declaration of war. Yeah. And I'm almost certain there wasn't one for Afghanistan either.
There definitely wasn't one for Korea, because that was called police. That was police operation, wasn't it? Which then just descended into war. That seems to be the way it goes, right? It starts as a military operation and then becomes a war. Is that because the way that the world is like nuclear armed, that to declare war would be to openly declare, right, okay, nukes are on the table. So it's best to keep it in the realms of quote unquote military operation or police action, or one of these like pseudonyms of.
Well, it was interesting. Russia actually, when they enacted the special military operation, they issued it as a UN. Basically, they put the procedure in effect for it, within the UN. There's the legal right for a country to defend itself, and they have to enact the act of self-defense, essentially. And Russia proclaimed an act of self-defense for the casus belli, the justification for this operation. So it's interesting because Ukraine hasn't offered a counter to that. They've just kind of started funding Nazis and ISIS and whoever else wants to go and fight with them. So it's
so hold on. So let's just go back right to the start. From our point of view, what happened? I mean, for me, the way I see it, right, I'll describe, and if you guys have got any objection, feel free to come in. If anybody in the chat wants to add anything, Doug, if you want to speak, just speak up. You hear us, right? Doug, can you hear?
What's up?
Alright, cool. I'm just making sure you can hear and you can interact.
Yeah, I'm hearing. Oh wait.
Anyway, right. So if anybody has any also has any input, feel free. But I see it as a way that there was obviously a military build-up going on in the area, right? That's why I said that I don't think Russia will quote-unquote invade, because at that moment in time there was the military build-up going on in the Ukraine of the Donbass area of the Ukrainian army. There was all that training of civilians going on in like Kharkiv and all these other places, weren't there? Footage of like old age pensioners doing AK-47 training and stuff. You know what I mean, right? So then the two breakaway republics in the east, Donbass and Lugansk, they reclaimed independence, didn't they? Because they'd claimed it in 2014, which was then sort of stepped back a little bit. They had a referendum, voted yes for independence, and then for Minsk, because of the Minsk protocol, when the invasion of the airport happened, it was like all put on hold for the Minsk protocol to be attempted, to save all out war. So they sort of stepped back on independence a little bit, right? And then you have 8 years of like DMZ and shelling each other constantly, a military build-up, and then you have this last sort of year of it building up even more and more. Go on.
Important to mention there as well that like the vast majority of the ceasefire infractions were committed by the Ukrainian side. So yes, obviously both sides were shelling each other. It was an active war, but following the ceasefire, I think there was something like 150,000 ceasefire infractions by the Ukrainian government side, and the Donbass side was like 12 or 13,000 over the 8 year period. So it was 10 times more likely for the Ukrainian side to violate the ceasefire than it was for the Donbass republics.
Right. Okay. And also, you would class their return fire as defensive because they're trying to shell military positions, right? That have been shelled.
One thing that was also interesting in the past month or so, I think, when the shit got really severe and they started, the Ukrainian side started basically breaking the ceasefire on a daily basis. One of the kind of one of the conditions of the Minsk Accords was that large caliber artillery wouldn't be used. So any artillery that was over 105 millimeters in shell size basically was banned from the contact line. And both sides had previously respected this. They only used small caliber artillery for basically 7 years. And then in the past month, the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian government side, started using 105 millimeter cannons against civilian infrastructure in Donbass, which is that's one of the things that I think pushed Putin over the edge to declare the military.
Well, hold on. Let's carry on the timeline.
Sorry, go on.
I mean, because that covers it. So I think that there was over this last month, that before this kicked off, there was a definite like build up and almost return to 2014 sort of style provocations in the area, and it was, you know, the Ukraine was getting all these javelin supplies off the West, and, you know, more troops were being sent to the area, and there was a real build up going on, and that was while the West was going on about, oh, Russia's going to invade at any point, right? It was almost like as if that was... So when I said to you that I don't think Russia's going to invade, why I still think I'm correct is because I don't believe that they followed the narrative that the West was trying to set up for them, right? Because of this build-up, that's the moment where the two breakaway republics saw what was coming, right? Because obviously shelling, and you can see the build-up along the contact line, and the laying of mines and all that sort of stuff that was going on. Anybody, militaries know when a build-up's happening from the other side, right? Because you're watching each other constantly. So they see it coming, and then they basically bin off the Minsk protocol, don't they? Because obviously it doesn't really apply if only one side is sticking to it. There's no point keeping it, right? It's obsolete if Ukraine are going to refuse to abide to it. So they chuck that in a bin and go back to the pre-2014, the 2014-2015 independence referendum declaration, and then redeclare independence, basically, which Russia then sort of Russia, Syria, and Venezuela, and a couple of other countries basically instantly recognized, didn't they?
I think that's it seems to me like that declaration wouldn't have gone ahead. The second declaration that we saw 3 days before the military operation began, without the express kind of support of Putin. I think
of course, but it's come off the back of watching what the Ukraine is doing, right? So it's seen that the Ukraine is building up. The DDRP, the Donetsk and Lugansk have obviously they've constantly had contact with Russia the whole 8 years. It's like the only way that humanitarian aid is getting into Donbass is through Russia. So they've almost said to them, look, this is what's going on. We're going to do this. So anyway, they declared independence. Russia's then recognised that and said, yeah, we recognise these countries exist. We recognise their right to sovereignty, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The next thing the two brand new countries did then was file another letter to Russia, wasn't it? Requesting military help because of an incoming threat from Ukraine, right? Because of the build-up, and then that was obviously responded to, and that's why Russia's now in Ukraine, and that's why I don't believe it's an invasion.
I think
as much as it's not an invasion of Syria, right? It's the same situation. The Syrian government has requested the help of Russia. The French government that requested the help of Britain during World War II, right? Or World War One, or Belgium, or whoever it was. I don't remember on the spot.
Well, yeah,
We
don't say that Britain invaded France when they came to. We say liberated, don't we? When they came
exactly.
When America and Britain launched D-Day.
But even America know that word. They don't call their invasion of Iraq an invasion, do they? They use the word intervention, even though it clearly was an invasion. And they did treat Iraq as a hostile state, and did just on their own accord decide that Iraq needed invading, right? And then did it and called it.
And France helped us liberate America from y'all. So
exactly.
Back in the day.
It's just this is why I don't think the word invasion applies, because when the Donbass is the Western media is conveniently not doesn't bother to mention Donbass, do they? Because it serves them better to just make it all about Russia versus Ukraine, because then they can angle it as like NATO versus Russia, right? NATO versus.
It's sometimes if it ever does get mentioned, it's just called the Russian-backed separatists, isn't it? To dehumanize them and make them not even seem like real people.
Yeah, or make them seem like they're just acting upon, the wishes.
Yeah,
of Russia.
I mean, make them sound like puppets, which is really like rich considering how many fucking actual puppet states the West has.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think that it's not an invasion anyway. I mean, would you counter that and say that it is? I don't like calling it one.
I would say that you're completely right, and the main reason for this is the kind of aims of this operation are to liberate all of the areas claimed by the DPR and LPR, which are currently occupied by Ukrainian troops, because not many people know about this. Not even people who are fairly clued up on the conflict are aware that like the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics and the full area of the Donbass in Ukraine makes up a larger portion of what the quote-unquote Russian-backed separatist militia rebels, whatever you want to call them, actually control, right? Now, a lot of it is controlled by, like Mariupol, for example, is controlled by the Azov battalion, or was. I don't know whether, I haven't been keeping up on the Mariupol situation really, so I'm not too sure whether they're still in operational control of the city. But essentially, the basis of this operation was to free the remainder of the Donbass from Ukrainian control, following Putin's recognition of the republic's independence. And that's why we're not seeing like a full-scale invasion. If there was a full-scale invasion, it would have been over by now, because Russia would have sent its entire expeditionary capabilities immediately into the West. They would have crushed all resistance with brutal force. They would have leveled cities to achieve their aims. Yeah, they would have gone in with shock and awe, as Americans like to say. But what we saw instead is they've gone in with a very light touch, really, if you compare it to kind of any Western intervention. The majority of the fighting, the vast majority of the fighting, is taking place in the east of Ukraine, the Donbass, where the republics claim that territory and have asked Russia for help to liberate it. And the only kind of other area that is even facing any kind of conflict is the area surrounding Kiev. And the reason for this, and the reason that we haven't actually seen a pitched battle in Kiev, is because how I see it is the Russian armor, which is slowly encircling the entire city of Kiev, that's more there as a warning to bring the Ukrainian government to the negotiating table. They're saying, look, we've got the capability to take this city. It will be brutal, it will be bloody, it will be horrible and violent for both sides. We can go in and take it. We're showing you our hand, as it were. And any sensible government would capitulate in this situation, especially when they're being offered a diplomatic solution that doesn't require the annexation of their entire country, because that's not what Russia wants. As I say, if Russia wanted to annex all of Ukraine, they could have done it by now, but they sent in...
Sammy, why are you very quiet?
I said they're not even asking Zelensky to step down, are they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, exactly.
They are.
No, well...
They are. They've asked him to step down.
No, they're not.
They are. Told him to step down.
No, they're not.
They are.
No, they're not. They're asking for the denazification, which is the removal of post-2014 Maidan elements from the state apparatus and the military of the Ukraine, such as like the Azov Battalion, UNA units, or from government positions, and kind of like a restructure. But like Zelensky himself, they never.
It gives credibility though to the Russian objective, doesn't it? If they negotiate with the actual current, whether we think it's a puppet government or not, which obviously we do, they are the recognized government of. They are the recognized government of Ukraine, right? So if Putin negotiates with them and gets the kind of settlements he wants with them, then it will have more legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. Whereas if he goes in and forces an election, like we saw with Crimea, where there was an election immediately after 2014. It's instantly just thrown away as
It was the other way around.
it's now a Rush.
No, it was the other way around. The election was first, wasn't it?
I thought Maidan came first.
Yeah, and then but the election came before Russia moved in, right? They moved in to protect the result of it.
Yeah. But what I mean is, like, if an election goes ahead, whether it be like for secession or for a new government or something like that, it's instantly seen by the quote-unquote international community, the collective West, as like a fake election, isn't it? You know, or evil Putin just rigging the election so that it says 93% in favor of whatever. Whereas if he can actually negotiate with the puppet government, have them accede to his demands, which obviously the denazification will get rid of a lot of members of the Ukrainian parliament if they accede to the demands. Also, Shoigu has come out and said that the Russian demands are non-negotiable. So it's basically a matter of the Kiev government must accept the terms of the demands, or, in the words of Vladimir Putin, the entire statehood of Ukraine, as we know it today, will be called into question. Which, I don't really know what that means. I don't know whether that means, like, they will move in on a full-scale invasion if their demands aren't met. I don't know whether that means that Odessa will be taken, leaving Ukraine as a landlocked, very poor rump state, hobbled without the Donbass, without the east, without the south. I don't really know what the what he means particularly by the statehood will be called into question. I don't think it'll be annexation, because from my perspective, it doesn't make any sense to annex the west of Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense to do that. The west of Ukraine is filled with liberals and Nazis. They are not friendly to the Russians. I mean, the reason we haven't seen a lot of resistance so far during the operation is because the majority of the fighting has been in the east of Ukraine, where a lot of people are Russian and do see the Russians as liberators. So the only people putting up the resistance are Nazis and Ukrainian military who aren't Nazis, which may well be the minority. You know, whereas if we saw a similar incursion into the west of Ukraine, you know, Lviv,
it would be a lot harder fought, wouldn't it? I mean, they're digging they're digging in. It looks like they've like prepared cities in the west, haven't they, for combat? They're like taking down statues and stuff.
I mean, I think if it comes to that, like the west of Ukraine, like it could very well be a situation where the Russian forces and the forces of the Donbass together kind of slice Ukraine in half along the Dnieper River, all the way along down to Odessa, and basically declare the east of Ukraine as a new state called Novorossiya, and the west of Ukraine can continue its existence, calling itself Ukraine, being a little Nazi rump state, having no freshwater access.
Well, no, it's not going to be able to be that, though, is it? Like, it's not. I think Russia seems like if you look at the way the angle of this obviously the angle in the mainstream media in the West is just like Putin bad, right? So there's no analysis any deeper than that. Putin bad, invasion. It goes no deeper. But in Russia, like it's seen as like the denazi thing is, they're serious about it, right? And why wouldn't they be? Russia's like the main target of World War II was Russians, right? The West gave Nazi Germany like blessing to go and enslave Jews and Slavs, right?
Well, we say never again with regards to the Holocaust, don't we? Which was 6 million to 12 million deaths, depending on the estimates you look at maybe
least.
Even more.
Way more.
But then you look at how many Slavs were killed, and there was 27 million, I believe. So that's twice the number of people killed in the Holocaust.
What I'm saying is, you can.
I'm just saying, like, you know, the West is so keen to to say never again, and we can't let something like the Holocaust happen ever again. But then rarely is it ever mentioned
But that's because Americans and Brits didn't have the Nazi Party like on their streets, right? I mean, rest of Europe did, but like all those communists that were in the resistance that fought against them are now like dead, So we've moved past that period of history, but you can tell why Russia will take the threat of, you'll see people go, you'll see people go. I mean, Putin said it in a speech this week, didn't he? They were asking him what is denazification, and he was saying, well, yeah, look, we've got Nazis in Russia, like every country in the world has. Like they're not bound to any specific nation, are they? Like their ideology shifts and adapts wherever they are in the world. But the difference is having them like underground in your country is way different to having them like in top government or military positions, right? That's the difference. When you start getting into government and military positions, well, then you're starting to like, lose the meaning of statements like "never again," aren't you? Right? They've now become. Thanks, Mass. Thanks for renewing your membership. They've become real almost. They've come out of the woods and they're into the establishment.
Yeah, I mean, as well, like you hear this kind of assertion, don't you? Like anytime, I mean, there seems to be two retorts, at least in Western social media at the moment. Whenever you bring up Ukraine's horrific Nazi problem, they say it's three retorts. Either one, it's just Russian propaganda, which is obviously not the case. Two, Russia has Nazis too, so how can a country with Nazis be doing denazification? And number three is that Zelensky is Jewish, and therefore this somehow means that the state is not riddled with Nazis. So, like, just to briefly kind of debunk those 3 points, because they're the three that I see the most often. With the first point, with it being quote unquote Russian disinformation, I mean, we've all seen how NATO this week tweeted out pictures of, Black Sun wearing fucking neo-Nazi girl boss women going to fight. We've seen all of the Western media coverage talking about Azov Battalion. It's no longer a secret. Even liberals know about Azov Battalion now. Not so much the others. The C-14, Svoboda, OUN, Right Sector. These are kind of things you only know if you've actually been kind of researching it a bit more. But even liberals know Azov Battalion. With the second point, with it being like Russia has Nazis too, obviously, as you just said, Putin addressed this point in his speech. He said, yeah, every country has Nazis. We've got lunatics running around with skinheads and swastikas and stuff like that. What country doesn't? Britain does, America does, France does. I mean, it's a fairly common thing.
I mean, they've got pretty close to getting into positions of power in Western countries as well, right? You could almost. Nigel Farage is borderline, right? He's run as politician many times. You've got like Le Pen in France, who comes close but never wins. You've got the AfD in Germany that get more popular. You've got Golden Dawn have got like one MP. So it does bleed in. It is a one Nazi is too many Nazis, right? That's
of course.
But
I mean, like, complete denazification should be the case always. But what differs the Ukrainian state from all of those things you just mentioned there is how enthusiastically the government itself supports these neo-Nazis. So, like, in Britain, right, Britain's a right-wing country. Politically right-wing. It's a very capitalist country. It's a huge banking sector, all this kind of stuff. But, like, neo-Nazism is condemned by the government. Even the reactionary Tory government, like, hates Nazis, basically. Like, they will.
Winston Churchill's speech.
That. But I'm talking about, like, if a police officer in Britain is found to have been posting anti-Semitic things on his Facebook, he will be fired, right? that will happen. It has happened on a few occasions.
If it
like it
becomes
makes
public,
headlines.
right?
Yeah. Well, obviously, if it becomes public, but that's what I mean. Like, there's no support for neo-Nazis from the government, right? Even in America, where I mean, obviously, Trump was a bit more sketchy with that. Like, he did, say a lot of shit that could be construed as supporting neo-Nazism.
Yeah, but he's not inviting known Nazis up to get military service awards and stuff, is he? Or giving them
But it's the thing with Ukraine and stuff, where you see town halls, city halls in Ukraine with enormous posters of Bandera's face draped over them. It's the fact that every kind of Ukrainian MP seems to have a picture of Bandera in their office. It's the fact that they don't just allow these tiki torch marches, but they support them vehemently. It's the fact that they are fully aware of how many neo-Nazi battalions and neo-Nazi battalions. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure the British.
Stop really quickly with some analyses.
Huh?
Can I just step quickly in with some analyses?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, after Tom finishes his point.
All right.
Let me just wrap up quickly. So obviously, the point being, you get them pictures that go viral occasionally of British and American people, soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq
Aussies with the Nazi flag.
Yeah, the Nazi flag. But these are isolated cases, right? Whereas I'm not trying to defend them, because obviously they are inherently fascist organizations, the Western militaries. But my point being, there are no open units full of neo-Nazis where every single one of them is tattooed with SS Thunderbolts in the British Army, in the American Army, or in the fucking Australian Army, right?
Oh wait, so requirement to get into that battalion is that you're ideologically a Nazi, right? The British Army don't get you to do a salute in the office, do they?
Exactly. And not just the one Nazi battalion. If it was just Azov, you could kind of maybe hand wave it away, but you couldn't. But
exactly. Even that's too much.
From what I know about the American military, it's actually not that far off. They make you pretty much worship the president and do all this shit when you're in there.
Was that American soldier who got sacked for writing "Communism will win" in his hat?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Anyway, Sammy, what were you going to say?
I was just about to say my thoughts about this conflict. So basically, the US sees there has 3 fronts in the world. One of it is the Middle Eastern front, the second being Eastern Europe, obviously confronting Russia, and the third one being Taiwan, or Chinese front. So basically, I believe that every time the way the Americans play this is that they flare up problems in one part or on one front, and they calm it down in the other two, and then calm down the situation in that place, and then flare up in the second place. As we're seeing, things kind of calmed down in the Middle East over the past 2-3 years, and then it flared up in Eastern Europe. I admit that last stream we were talking, I was not expecting for things to take this route so soon.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, this is what has happened essentially, and we see that pretty much right after the Ukraine crisis, or the special military operation, the Americans were, after being quite lackadaisical in the Vienna talks with Iran, they suddenly tried to start rushing to get a new nuclear deal agreed on.
Right.
After the months of negotiations since, I believe it was November, the Iranians still maintain that the main point they want is the removal of all American sanctions. So they kind of, this is the way the Americans play their game. They act as the good cop with one set of people and bad cop against the other set of people, and then they just switch up essentially, and they try to twist, they do some manipulation here and there, and they try to play everyone against each other, if you know what I mean. kind of reminiscing the Sino-Soviet split. So here, I believe they're trying to act quite easy with Iran. They started to talk about like removing some sanctions or wanting to get to a nuclear deal after they set things up with Russia. So they're kind of like drive some countries into one corner and setting them aside from the other countries, if that makes sense. However, it was announced today that the Iranians actually suspended the Vienna negotiations, and an interview was made with the chief of the Iranian delegation, and he said that the Americans, like, before the Ukrainian operation, were quite lackadaisical, and they suddenly got really excited about a nuclear deal afterwards. Also, he mentioned that one of the reasons that the Iranians pulled out the negotiations or delayed or suspended them was because of problems between Moscow and Washington. But the main point still being that the Americans aren't talking about removing any sanctions or anything. Now, I believe that this is a good indication that the emerging powers in the multipolar world are at least coordinating with each other on a strategic level.
Right.
We've seen something similar with Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say?
I said that's quite clear, right? I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, indeed. And we've seen the same thing with Venezuela, with Maduro essentially just fobbing off the Americans when they came crawling, asking for Venezuela to up their production of oil.
Yeah. So just explain that.
So
what's gone on?
I don't have too many details about it. Richard Medhurst has covered it. They covered it nicely. But essentially, what happened a few days ago, an important U.S. delegation made a visit to Venezuela. They held talks with Maduro about increasing his production of oil, basically fobbing off Russia or backstabbing them, but he refused.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm trying to say. They're trying to take one country into a corner and say, look, we'll treat you nicely, we'll treat you less worse than before, and we'll make some concessions with you, whilst they flare up things on another front,
which is ridiculous,
which is
though,
currently
right?
Eastern Europe.
In what world is Venezuela, who have been on the receiving end of the United States declaring their legitimate government as illegitimate for the last 4 years now, with this
and they've just made a 180.
Exactly, declaring this idiot American agent as their president, making other countries declare it as well. Iran and Russia are two of the only countries in the world that help Venezuela beat the sanctions and fly supplies in, whilst America's going there to film the results of their sanctions, but frame it as if it's Maduro stealing all the food. Do you know what I mean? What world, setting fire to supply trucks on bridges? It's just ridiculous. On what world is the Venezuelan government, after all that help that Russia's given it, on the receiving end of US bullying,
where the
US is making video games where Venezuela is the bad guy, etc., etc., and then one visit where they go, like you said, we'll treat you slightly less bad than we've been treating you for the last 5 years if you fuck over your own ally. What are they going to do? Yes.
Exactly. It's really rich of them. And I think that when things calm down, which I think is kind of soon in the European/Russian front, things either might flare up again in the Middle East, especially if the Vienna talks aren't concluded with a new deal, or especially if there is no new nuclear deal. If the Vienna talks end up with a nuclear deal and the European front does cool down, then they might be preparing something for the Chinese front, especially with something with Taiwan or something with occupied South Korea.
But why though?
And I think
if they can't defend Ukraine, though, Sammy, what makes them think that they can
No, I don't
China
think they've
next,
been
right?
wanting to defend Ukraine from the first place. Like, this is. I think that now the way they see things is that they can't exactly stop the emergence of a unipolar world. So for now, the only thing they can maintain is instability and destruction throughout the world, and the fomenting of divisions between the new emerging powers for this multipolar world, so,
I
in
think-
order to like maintain their hegemony more easily. So I think.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say my final point. I think that I can't exactly say when things will flare up on the Chinese front or on the East Asian front, but I think we're starting to see the seed being sown there at the moment, especially with yesterday's election of South Korea's far-right president. I can't recall his name at the moment. But he's reportedly a lot more anti-DPRK, a lot more anti-China, much more pro-US than the previous one.
Name's
on top of...
Is his name.
Sorry?
Yoon Suk-yeol is his name.
Yeah, I think it was that one, yeah. And on top of that, and on top of that, we see like the Americans trying to like sneak in more like cooperation with Taiwan, like the regime in Taiwan, with Tsai Ing-wen. So things are slowly in the making, I believe, on the East Asian front. So, like after what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, I think that will calm down soon. Then they either might flare things up in the Middle East back again if there's no nuclear deal, or if there is a nuclear deal, then they might delay more chaos in the Middle East and Europe, and then put their focus back to the Chinese front. But how will they do so? I'm not sure. Things have a million ways to manifest.
Yeah. And like you said, Sam, at the start, nobody saw. I agree. I wouldn't have put anything. I wouldn't have put anything happening in. I wouldn't have thought the US would have let this situation in Ukraine happen right a couple of months ago, because basically they've lost all that like last 8 years of pissing about in Ukraine. They've lost it because they overstepped the mark, right? They pushed Russia into responding. What the US should have done, which would have been, more aligned with their geopolitical outlook, like you said then, to create instability, would be to keep that argument over Minsk Protocol going in Ukraine, so they could, keep Ukraine destabilized, stop Europe being able to, really connect with Russia again, stop China being able to invest in Ukraine, etc. Keep a civil war going, keep somewhere where they could shill weapons, and keep a perpetual enemy going. So it's like they've overstepped the mark. So, but I don't see them going to China, because I think that they're just biting off more than they can chew again. I think the US can't take on a conventional army. When was the last time the US fought one-on-one with a conventional opponent? I mean, maybe Iraq, but like half the Iraq army just like deserted as soon as the US turned up, because most of them were fucking compradors anyway. So like it's not faced a real opponent, and it loses to
since World War II.
Well, no, even World War II, it wasn't the US, was it? It was the Soviet Union, China, Britain.
Yeah,
the world.
I mean, like, but what I mean is they faced the conventional Japanese army quite heavily in the Pacific, and that they fucking had to use nuclear weapons to win that one.
Yeah,
they couldn't win conventionally. They couldn't do it.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is they're not matched to fight a conventional opponent. So like drawing Russia into this battle was a complete stupid idea for them, really. As soon as a country that gets bullied by the US manages to organise its military into an actual military, it's like game over for the US. It doesn't matter who that country is, does it? I mean, Cuba's probably the smallest out of all of them. I mean, even Panama had a go at it, didn't it? These tiny countries, Cuba, Vietnam, to quote Luna Roy, she says that Vietnamese were farmers with sticks to begin with. You know, it starts like that, and then they get organised, and then they get supplied with military equipment, and now, you know, now they're training. Now they've formed a battalion. Now the US has got no ground at all. Korea, exactly the same. Korea's the same. They bombard the place, but they can't beat the army's dug in, right? People are determined, organised. Same in Donbass. You know, it's the reason why Donbass has resisted for 8 years, because you're turning up with an invasion force, you know, people from the West, onto somebody else's land.
To be fair about Korea, they did get a lot of assistance from Mao Zedong in China.
Yeah, of course.
But even the People's Volunteer Army, which it was numerically large, yeah, but like they were going in with fucking rifles they'd seized from Imperial Japan, like 10 years earlier. They were going in with straw shoes into, like, you know, freezing cold temperatures in the north of Korea.
World War II leftover tanks that were getting donated.
Yeah, and they're fighting against, like, the US military at the time, when it had more aircraft carriers than it does today, you know, and they won. I mean, obviously it wasn't just the Chinese. It was, as you say, it was the Koreans, it was the Chinese, it was even some Soviet aid, as in actual Soviet foot soldiers, aircraft pilots, stuff like that. It was a united front, really, against the Yanks, but still, the point was the Yanks were the technologically superior force in that conflict. But all they can do is bomb a country, and that's always been the US's doctrine, though. If you look at it, if they can bomb a country back to the Stone Age, they will do it, and it depends on the resolve of that people that they're getting bombed. So you look at Cambodia, you look at Laos, you look at Vietnam, you look at Korea. All of these people were socialists, right? Who were very patriotic for their country and resisted violently the US's, like, carpet bombing attempts. Now, Iraq was different because it was a capitalist comprador state, kind of led by comprador national bourgeoisie. So the people didn't really want to die for Iraq. You know, the people didn't want to. I mean, so that's why they folded so quickly. But the doctrine's always been the same. The US sends
That's actually a good point you made there, Tom, about, like, the resolve. In a lot of, like, literature about Vietnam, China, or the DPRK, about these communist authoritarian countries, it's always like, the citizens don't even. It's an authoritarian state. They're all brainwashed. They're all, you know, like, controlled by the government. It's like, no. If you look at the history, they were proud of their country. They fought for this result. This is what the people wanted. You know, it's Kim Il Sung. You know, at the time in Korea, if you know, the people didn't. If the army was like, you know what, fuck you, we want to be with the Americans, whatever, he wouldn't have any power at all. There was no way
it would have folded instantly.
Yeah, exactly.
And listen, how does the US deal with that like mass popular movement? Like, what's its solution in Korea? Well, it's the same solution that it's taken in Ukraine. It's the same solution that it took in Vietnam. It's the same solution that it took in Cuba. It's the same solution that it took in against the Soviet Union. It's the same solution that it took, you know, etc., against Venezuela, Bolivia recently, which is to just dump money into, like, local fascist movements, right? Yeah. Simple. All these same in Middle East, right, Sammy? There's a similarity between how the Arab Spring happened to Euromaidan, right? And a lot of the heavy list. I mean, these movements, like, do have, like, legitimate protests going on. People are pissed off about government and stuff, like they are there happening. But at the same time, there's like 90% of the lifting is going on in the background by some fascists that are being paid by,
definitely, yeah,
you know, somebody else to go and cause trouble.
Yeah, definitely. And the whole point is to completely dismantle the whole state apparatus.
Yeah, its
Without,
ability to deal
word.
with the protest.
Yeah.
And you saw it in Ukraine that the US would go. I think they sent the embassy staff went to the protests, and she met the police, right, and shook hands with all the police.
Victoria Nuland, she was the one who was famous for saying "fuck the EU" when there was a phone call at the time. Somebody said, "How will basically funding Nazi militias in Ukraine kind of destabilize the EU?" And her response was "fuck the EU." So the whole, as you just stated, then the playbook that the USA line lays out is always the same. They fund fascists in the country, be that Islamic fascists like ISIS, like Al Qaeda, like the Mujahideen, even the Taliban, or domestic fascists like European fascists, actual neo-Nazis like in Maidan, like in the situation in the years of lead in Italy. There's too many to literally count. I mean, the fascist collaborators in Japan, in Korea, the south of Korea, in the south of Vietnam. All of these, the playbook is the same. They fund the fascists, and then eventually they get involved, but their own army is pathetic and can't stand up to a force of, as Luna Oi says, farmers. They can't do it, so they have to literally carpet bomb a country back to the Stone Age, and it never works. Like, the USA hasn't had a successful intervention anywhere. I can't think of one intervention with the exception of Iraq, but Iraq was different because they were targeting a weak state. But even then, if you look at Iraq today, it's not in the US's sphere. It's not particularly a US puppet. I mean, it is, but it's heavily in the Iranian
they looted
kind
it,
of
didn't they?
sphere of influence.
That objective was they looted the shit out of the place. That objective was correct, but they've not managed to keep the place as like a oil. It's not the US's oil supplier anymore, is it? Because
Afghanistan, same again. Afghanistan's the most glaring one, I think, for me, because there was a 20-year occupation, and then literally 2 weeks after they left, it crumbled to the very same people they were fighting for the past 20 years. That shows how weak.
They had been in pretty much shambles up until that point themselves as well, right?
Yeah. I mean,
the Taliban were not in control. They sort of just launched an offensive as soon as the US started to close bases down. It was all right, then cool. The opposition, the Comprador government is so fragile and weak that it doesn't even exist, that they just go, right, yeah, we're back, and there's no resistance.
Did you see that article that was going around today on Twitter? It was from the fucking Sun, so I hate to even bring it up because fuck the Sun. But there was this British Afghanistan veteran, right? And he's gone over to join the Kiev International Brigades as a member of the Georgia Grey Wolves, the fascist organization from Georgia.
The one the West is pretending is just a national battalion. It's literally the Grey Wolves.
Yeah. The fascist organization.
It's mad.
So anyway, he joins this. Yeah, so he joins this fascist organization. He gets to Ukraine. Within 2 days of his arrival, he says, I'd love to have the quote up because the quote is absolutely beautiful from him. But it was something along the lines of, "This was nothing like Afghanistan. We were faced immediately with airstrikes, attack helicopters, and missile bombardments from the Russian side, and we had to flee." Right? So let's just deconstruct that very quickly. So the British soldiers, this isn't like shooting goat herders in the desert. This is what an actual military looks like. Holy shit, I've never seen this before. So the Grey Wolf Battalion flees off into the forest and manages to escape from the onslaught of Russian firepower that they just met, and they get captured by a search brigade of the SBU, the Ukrainian Special Forces, right? Not Special Forces, Intelligence Services.
Mm-hmm.
So this British soldier, alongside all his Georgian fascist mates, get taken into custody in Ukraine because there's no chain of command in Ukraine. There's literally just random militias running about everywhere. so no one knows who anyone is. You can kind of just walk in there, get handed an AK, and go and fight, right? So the SBU takes these guys in, gives them what the guy describes as brutal interrogation for over 4 days, where they took beatings from the SBU because the SBU believed that this Georgian fascist brigade were Russian spies, right? This is the story. Like, you almost couldn't write it. It's so funny. And then within 1 day of him being released from SBU custody, he trekked to the Polish border on foot and got on the refugee buses back to Britain.
Yeah.
He's gone. Like that. But that's just like, that shows how an imperial foot soldier who spent the past 20 years or partook in the
kids.
Bullying little kids, shooting dogs, shooting old men,
throwing dogs.
He thinks they think that's war. They think that's what war is, because that's what they've been trained to do. And then they come up against like fucking 6.5 foot Sergei in his Ka fucking 54 attack helicopter, just like launching a barrage of fucking Soviet missiles at them. And they're just totally unprepared for it. And it's fucking beautiful because, like, I mean, the Russian army is powerful, yeah, but imagine how these fucking Western forces would fare against China, which is the real military juggernaut of the, that opposes the USA. Like, China's armed forces is far more integrated, far more modernized, and probably far more powerful in every region except for nuclear forces, because obviously Russia has a massive powerhouse of nuclear force. But like, China's forces would absolutely decimate any Western kind of incursion. Like, if they tried to involve themselves in a Taiwan situation or anything like that, China would snap them in half, and I don't think they'd be prepared for that.
But like, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right? What you've just said is exactly why the West just doesn't do anything to Russia in Syria, right? Because the same story happened, right? This is why the West didn't want Russia to get involved in Syria, because as soon as Russia got involved, it was game over, wasn't it? That war was, the war wasn't won. The battle had not been won, but the war was basically over in terms of the resistance, quote unquote. The rebels being able to win that war, because as soon as Russia stepped in, well, now it's not just Western-backed fascist versus floundering government, because Assad had like the world turning on him because of all the propaganda. His government was going through the works, wasn't he, as like a regime change. As soon as Russia steps in, as soon as Russia vetoed the no-fly zone, like, that was a show of things to come. As soon as Russia actually were like, right, we're going to intervene and get this war finished, like, the whole war just turned on its head, because now it's not just rebel fascist with a second-hand World War II machine gun, right? It versus rusty Soviet jet. It's brand new Sukhoi jet bomber versus with the latest Russian ordnance versus, like, say, vintage gun. So the battle has completely flipped on its head. It's the same in Ukraine. The only difference is that Ukraine is an organised army, a lot more so than like these ragtag rebel groups, because it's had 8 years to do that, right?
But the thing with the Ukrainian army is, which is quite interesting, it's kind of made up of two cores, really. You've got the integral armed forces of Ukraine, which are its standing army, and then you've got its National Guard, right? And both, like a National Guard in a normal circumstance, like the American National Guard, okay, that's a poor example. Let's say the French National Guard, right? That's a better example. Is just tends to be like old men with guns, tasked with domestic protection while the army goes and does imperial ventures. But with Ukraine, it's a bit more like Iran insofar as the National Guard is like a parallel military organization. It's as well equipped. It's as it's got tanks, it's got fighter jets, it's got artillery, it's got SAM divisions of its own. It's not just like mechanized infantry, right? Basically. Mm-hmm. So the situation you've got at the minute is the National Guard is almost entirely made up of fascist paramilitary organizations, Foreign ones as well coming in en masse, from ISIS, HTS, Al Qaeda, all variations of Islamic fascist organizations coming to help the Ukrainians fight. You've got the Georgian fascists, you've got the Grey Wolves, you've got all these.
Hold on. On that point, Sammy, is that not going to be taken as an advantage by Syria? Like, aren't Syria? Isn't it strategically stupid for Syrian al-Nusra to be leaving and going to fight for some lost cause in Ukraine?
Wait, can you just repeat the question really quickly?
I'm saying, isn't it like the news coming out that Syrian rebels, moderate rebels in the West, are going to Ukraine to fight? Is that not like strategically stupid in terms of their plight in Syria? If I was Syria, I'd be taking advantage of this, right? If I knew that 10,000 al-Nusra fighters were leaving for the Ukraine, Idlib being...
It certainly sounds like quite counterproductive.
Exactly. I mean, that war's not going very good for them, is it?
Yeah, definitely. But like in the end, that's like what they were made for, really.
True.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they are. I mean, compradors. That just shows who's paying them, though, doesn't it? Because like, if their true interests were to establish a democratic Syria or whatever the fuck they say, which is obviously bullshit, like they would be fighting tooth and nail in Syria for that objective. Why are they going to Ukraine? Why does that? Why does that affect
wages
them?
are higher, right?
Yeah. Because the CIA said, "No, you're going on a field trip." No, but like what I'm getting at is the National Guard is made up of essentially fascist paramilitaries. Not all, but the majority. Foreign and domestic. You've got Azov, you've got Svoboda, you've got Right Sector, you've got OUN, you've got all these lunatics from the domestic side, with all the international ones I just mentioned then. Now the actual Ukrainian armed forces, which is a separate force, essentially a separate army, these are the ones that are laying down their arms en masse because they don't want to fucking die for Ukraine. They're the ones who are getting an actual paycheck from it. They're not paid by the USA. They're not receiving any kind of high-tech US weaponry, which always seems to end up in the hands of the National Guard, which is Azov Battalion and co. So like you're seeing a lot of cases where you're hearing about Ukrainian soldiers surrendering. These soldiers that are surrendering are the military, and they're surrendering because they know that the Russians will be fine with them as long as they're not out and out neo-Nazis. They're not going to be kind of penalized heavily, especially if they lay down their arms. Russia's always been saying, look, lay down your arms and we will, we will not, we won't harm you, we won't torture you, we won't do anything like that. Now, we've seen countless videos of the Ukrainian armed forces torturing not just captured Russian soldiers, but also captured like people that are sympathetic to Russia and like really obscure categories. There's been communists getting abducted off the streets as well in Ukraine. Anyone who's kind of at all critical of the Ukrainian government is just disappearing.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's terrifying. There was a Communist Party of Britain was sending around a bulletin asking people to email the representative of the embassy in Kiev, in the Ukrainian embassy in Britain, to demand the freedom of these two communists that have been arrested because they were facing execution for their views. Now, obviously, that won't change anything. They are very likely already dead. To be realistic about the scenario, but what we're seeing is we're seeing the actual Ukrainian military understands the kind of futility of this situation, and they're kind of laying down their arms en masse. They're kind of surrendering en masse. And what you're hearing about most of the fighting is the National Guard, which is obviously because it's made up of Nazi militias, and they know that Russia's going in with the objective of denazification. They can't really surrender because they'll probably spend the rest of their lives in a fucking prison in Novorossiya or something for their crimes. So they know they've got to go down fighting, which is why they're stationing themselves in hospitals, in maternity wards, in fucking kindergartens and schools, because they know that, oh well, if we're gonna get fucking destroyed by Russia, we might as well force Russia to destroy some civilian infrastructure in the process, and then get some nice propaganda for the USA, basically. And that's basically what we've seen happen the whole war. Like, that's why the Russians have been able to advance so quickly into the east, and it's only when they get to like the Nazi strongholds, Mariupol, Kherson, Kharkov, these cities which are heavily infested with the National Guard militias, these are the ones which are putting up the most resistance, and these are the ones where all of the supposed Russian war crimes are going on, when in reality it's, I mean, I don't want to sound like a fucking Putin shill or anything right now, but all the evidence we've seen so far from the Ukrainian side has been either fabricated completely. I mean, like the Ghost of Kiev, the Cucumber Babushka. Did you hear about that one?
I mean, this Ghost of Kiev one is just utterly ridiculous, right? The guy, what, 50 kills or something?
Probably more now, I guess. I don't know whether.
So basically, they're claiming this Ukrainian MiG pilot has got like 50 kills or something. How I mean, it just shows how disattached from reality Westerners are, that they can be told
They'll believe it.
That there's a pilot that's killed 47 planes in the last 2 weeks, like you know, in modern dogfighting as well, 47 of them as well. Like, that's ridiculous. Well, like the one of the best dogfighters of all time, like in history, I think, like kind of the term dogfight was kind of invented around about the time that he was prevalent, was the Red Baron in Germany. You know, the infamous World War I pilot who flew the Red Plane. And I think he scored somewhere in the region of 15 or 20 kills, like, and that's the
godly.
whole war.
Yeah, and that's considered like a godly performance in World War I planes, right, which travel at like fucking 100 miles an hour, something like that,
exactly.
Maybe a little faster.
Modern
These things
jets.
are fucking supersonic fighter jets with like fucking afterburning turbofan engines, fucking flak discharges to get rid of missiles, and we're led to believe that with all these people fucking filming TikTok videos, no one's caught the fucking Ghost doing his fucking sorties, not once. I mean, obviously, we don't need to explain why it's bullshit. The story itself is just so clearly bullshit. My favorite one was the Cucumber Babushka. Did you hear that one?
What's this? Go on.
You didn't hear this one?
Say it. I might have done.
It was like some blue check fucking Ukrainian fucking idiot on Twitter had said, like, just got reports that an old woman with a jar of cucumbers managed to bring down a Russian military drone with from her balcony by throwing the cucumbers at the drone.
A military drone was flying lower than somebody's apartment block.
Either that or this old woman was capable of throwing fucking cucumbers 10,000 feet in the air. I don't know which side of the story we're supposed to believe, but that was supposedly the case. And like, it wasn't. I mean, it's now just treated as a joke, like by our side. Like, people call her the Cucumber Babushka, and it's said in the same breath as the Ghost of Kiev. But like, this was said with utmost seriousness, and so many Westerners and fucking Ukraine flag in name liberals were like, "Oh my God, that's so cool! Long live the people of Kiev, Slava Ukraini," you know, all this fucking shit. Like, so they genuinely believe that you can say anything, and fucking Westerners will just believe it. It's fucking insane.
Yeah, it's mad. It is mad. Right, I think we'll end this show here for this week. What do we think's going to happen before, in this space? We've got 2 weeks before we're streaming again. Do you think it'll still be going on, or like Sammy said, think it'll have wrapped up?
I think about 2 weeks. I think roughly 2 weeks the whole operation will be done.
Yeah. It looks like it's going to have to go the distance, doesn't it? Because Ukraine is clearly not going to accept any sort of negotiation, are they? They like go to them, and then...
depends. If they keep stalling with these negotiations and Putin's forced to move on Kiev, then that might force their hand. If they lose Kiev and they have to withdraw the entire Ukrainian government to Lvov, then they need to either make they make a choice then as to whether they fucking outright surrender now, or they go down fighting. Because if they lose Kiev, they've basically lost the war. You know,
the
capital gets seized.
There's news. There's been like a 50-mile long convoy of apparent. I mean, you've seen it on satellite. There's been a 50-kilometer convoy of Russian equipment sat outside Kiev, and the Western media are reporting it as if like, oh, the Russian invasion is going slow, right? They're slowed down somehow because they're just parked up, and not that they're just like not doing anything because they're just waiting for the place to submit. In what war? In what, you know? If that was the case, if their equipment was holding them up, they would just ditch the equipment, wouldn't they, and just march on the place, like, you know, if that was strategically what they needed to do. So it's quite clear that it's all just copes, isn't it? So I think that they're just going to hold out as long as possible.
I think my personal guess is about 2 more weeks. I think once this main pocket of the Ukrainian army, which is currently encircled in the east, once that's wiped out or forced to surrender, because it's right in the middle of the cauldron now. The cauldron's boiling, and when that situation reaches its apex and the army is either forced to surrender or be destroyed, then that literally just leaves National Guard in charge of Ukraine then. So that's where the situation gets really shady. If I was the government, that would be when I would surrender. But then again, the government may well be overthrown by neo-Nazi militias because there's no one.
Could it be that Russia sort of sits on the edges of Kiev until Donbass has been liberated, and then maybe they just withdraw back to that contact line and just go, it's over? Do you know what I mean? And there is no negotiating. Maybe they just set up a border and they're like, well, that's it. Do you know what I mean? Almost like what happened in Georgia.
Possibly, but then you've still got the other issues of demilitarization, denazification, which seem like very sincere goals.
But if that's happened, if that's already happened in the east side, and they can maintain that border without, because Russia has only a certain amount of time to complete, right, before it starts to become a net negative. The troops start to get tired of the operation, public support starts to wane, all kinds of reasons, right? So they've got to get it over and done with. Now, if the government isn't willing to like sit down to the table, and the West is still intent on like trying to flare up the situation, it wouldn't be in Russia's interests to just sit on Kiev, hoping that at some point the West is going to go, okay, we'll sit down and talk now. It possibly could be strategically better to just withdraw back to the line, hold the line, and go, right, we'll just have like, you stay there, we stay here, and we'll just not talk to each other. We're not going to shell anyone else, but we'll not shell you, and we'll see what happens, because they've got to invite Ukraine onto them again. Do you get what I'm saying?
It's possible. I mean, that's one solution, but
the stubbornness of the West, I don't see that we're going to have like we're not going to have like a proper like UN or whatever established end to the situation. It'll just kind of like fizzle out. That's what I think will happen, and I think that's what will happen because the West doesn't want to end it officially. Do you get what I mean? I just think it's become such a mess that I think Russia will liberate Donbass and just be like, okay, that's it, war done.
Very, very possibly. I think you could be completely right about that. But all I'd say is this. I mean, as you say, 2 weeks ago we were debating whether or not this was going to happen in the first place.
We weren't debating whether it was going to happen, because we always said that if the red line was that the Minsk agreement, areas got invaded, and that's what happened. So
no, I know. I agree.
were right.
What I mean is, I know what you mean. What I'm saying is though, like, this situation moves and changes so fast that like it's so hard to. I mean, we can predict it on a purely military objective basis. Like, yes, it would make the most sense for them to liberate the Donbass and then withdraw and preserve what diplomatic and political capital they still have remaining to them. But in the same vein, there could be a fucking neo-Nazi coup which assassinates fucking Zelensky next week, which would completely change the entire dynamic.
What would that do? What, drag the whole... And actually, what? They just declare war on Ukraine and your war on Russia?
Yeah, you know, it could go any kind of way. The situation's so complicated. I think if it persists as it is right now with no significant changes, I think the Ukrainian army in the east will be encircled and destroyed. I think we'll see that in the next week or so. I think then Russia will basically say, right, we're giving you a final deadline now to talk to us. If you do not accede to the talks, or Kiev's going to fall. And then we're either going to have a battle of Kiev, which is going to be horrific diplomatically, politically, and physically as well. Or there is just some kind of negotiated withdrawal. But the issue is, like, with Georgia, like, they could just withdraw. There was no kind of desire to fight on. No one wanted to keep fighting the Russians after Georgia. They wanted to, you know, have peace as quickly as possible. I don't know whether the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, any that survive this shit in the West, I don't know if any of them would be prepared to let this lie. I think they would want to keep launching liberation attacks on the Donbass and the Crimea and stuff like that.
It's their ideology, isn't it? It wasn't Georgia's ideology to It's literally their ideology, war with Russia. So I get what you're saying. That would be down to them to you know, fix, wouldn't it?
That's the thing. I don't know whether that can be allowed to happen, because that doesn't resolve the actual problems.
True.
Like,
I mean,
so
you
the
could resolve it.
issue.
You just have to be like, right, if that flares up, then, you know, you agree that this resumes again. Do you know what I mean?
But then again, I can see the West using that to their own ends, propaganda-wise. Again, if you've got Russia withdraws,
I mean, we've not touched on it in the show, but the West seems to not be interested, right? You've got the US is like, now we're not giving planes to them. NATO's like, now we're not. Basically, the Zelensky's like raging that NATO's not going to get. You've got neo-Nazis begging for no-fly zones on Twitter because they're just not getting it. Because NATO knows that it's not really in the interest of America or Europe to start a war with Russia, right? They know it's not. So I think that America probably could, and I think that even America, Europe could have some sort of weight over the moderate side of the west of Ukraine in terms of, well, you've got to actually do something about these Nazis, in the same way that the West switched sides in World War II, right, and suddenly became anti-Nazi after doing, you know, all in those years leading up to World War II, where they were doing secret deals with Nazis over
honestly
what lands they could invade.
I think if the liberals, Zelensky and his liberals, stay in power in Ukraine, I think they will surrender to Russia. I think they'll wait until the army in the east is encircled and destroyed. They'll realise the futility of their position, and I think they will surrender on Russian terms. I think they will go full demilitarization, full
with America telling them to as well, I think.
Yeah, very probably. Full constitutional change with no NATO, and you know, and some sort of denazification effort, whether that be a prohibition of Azov battalion and the other likes of Azov, that kind of thing. But I also do see, I mean, we saw the fucking SBU assassinating the guy who was
allegedly,
who was.
We don't know it was them. Do we? Confirmed. Allegedly, it was them. It could have just been some neo-Nazis, right?
Well, I would imagine a lot of the SBU are neo-Nazis.
True.
But yeah, I mean, like, what I'm saying is, like, neo-Nazi forces, whether they be in the SBU or not, are willing to assassinate political figures to further their own ends. And Zelensky, they could martyr him They could martyr him, say it was a Russian fucking secret agent that did it, and then use that as some kind of pretext to seize power themselves. And in such a chaotic situation as you've got in the west of Ukraine right now, with only really Azov and the other like standing up for the West Ukrainian state, they would probably get a lot of support from the fucking rabid neo-Nazi supporters we've got in Ukraine. So I think if the ideal solution is this doesn't happen, obviously, Russia negotiates with the liberal side and manages to get some kind of solution, which I think will come following the complete destruction of the forces in the east. But I also do give it like maybe a 50-50 chance that Zelensky doesn't see the end of the week. Like I think there's a serious chance that Nazis could get to him, and then if they do, that really complicates things, and it then becomes really hard to guess what the next stage is then.
True. Right, before we finish up, let me have a look at some comments and you can reply to some of them. Let's have a look. Okay, Mass was talking about super chats earlier. I'll try and fix that for next week. Nazis everywhere. Cuba doesn't have Nazis. Vietnam also, none in China either. I bet there actually are. There are Nazis in Cuba because there were people going out to help support these US protests, weren't there, the other month? There definitely are Nazis in China, right? I mean, you see them on Weibo, whether they're just like comedy LARPer Nazis or people who believe in it.
I think
the difference is they don't have any sort of power. It's just like an individual in his bedroom. There's a way big difference between some individual in his bedroom to somebody who can, pass legislation. A big difference. Go on, Tom.
I was going to say as well, like, specifically neo-Nazis, like, I think that's pretty much a uniquely Western kind of phenomenon, really. Western and European, including Russia. Like, the idea of neo-Nazism, like, you've got fascists in every country. Not necessarily Sieg Heilin, people that will ascribe to that ideology, but there's people in China who... But there's people in China who will call for China to become an imperialist force and take Mongolia back by force, annex Japan, annex Vietnam, just because they can, right? There's people that want that. Like, there is people that want that. They are rampant nationalists. I don't know whether I'd call them Nazis, though. That's the differentiation. Like, I think fascist is just a better catch-all term because obviously Nazis.
I mean, when I say Nazi, I mean fascist, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Let's have a look anymore. Somebody mass advertising our Telegram. Yes, exactly. If you haven't already joined our Telegram, t.me/MangoPress. Join it now because like everybody on Twitter's getting banned. So make sure you get on there because if we do lose accounts, whatever, and wherever you can watch, listen, read us next will be posted on there. Let's have a look what else.
I'm surprised my new account hasn't been banned yet, to be honest.
Advertise your new account. Advertise your new account for anybody not following you.
I think everyone in here probably is already. I'm now. It's still Mausina as opposed to just it's Mausina.
The US fears Russia's military more than they do China's. I think I agree with that statement, and I think I agree with it not because China's military is weak, but just because on like combat experience it weighs for a lot, and I think Russia has, in the last 50 years had way more combat experience than China's. I think the two of them together would be an absolute unstoppable force.
And also one thing that is kind of often overlooked is the sheer numerical superiority of Russian nuclear weapons as well. Russia's got like 7,000 nukes. America's got about 5,000 to 6,000 that we know of. China's got 325.
And I mean,
so
the way I see it as well is it's like the US Army is like a Lexus or Mercedes showroom, right? Like they kit their soldiers out in the most expensive gear so they can like show it off to whatever puppet state / dictator they need to impress, right? With the price tag of with the top price tag. I think I read a comparison once was like $20,000 to kit a US troop out. I think it was about 10 years ago. $20,000 to kit a US troop out, opposed to $800 to kit a Chinese PLA soldier out, right? And that's like modern equipment.
Theo was sending me videos of it was a couple of months ago. He was sending me videos of like Chinese TikTok Douyin, and it was somebody who had bought a bulletproof vest, like a military issue bulletproof vest off like Taobao, right? And like these bulletproof vests in America cost like $800-900 or something. And I think they were going on Taobao for like $8 or $9, and like
exactly.
some yank had bought a American standard issue bulletproof vest, and then bought a Chinese Taobao vest, and then shot them with like various different types of guns, and like the Chinese vest was just as good, but it was like a 1/100th of the price. So,
so but think about that logistically, right? So in terms of like actual being able to respond to a military situation like effectively, China can put 100 troops on the battlefield, whereas the US can put 1. Like it just doesn't make logical sense, does it? Like it goes back to what we're talking about, like where when faced with conventional armies that have been built to be as effective as possible for the lowest cost. It's like they should have realised that this was the Nazi Germany's problem as well. They could have the most expensive, best equipped Tiger II tanks, right? But one Tiger II versus 10 T-30, T-34s that have been made for $1,400, right? It's just illogical, isn't it? So
it's the same with America's like aircraft as well, which is obviously like kind of their main realistic force is America's aircraft. Like you look at how much the fucking F-35 program has cost. Like in total, it's cost something like $5 trillion, I think, or $3 to $5 trillion, which is the same cost as the entire Belt and Road Initiative. Like the entire Belt and Road Initiative for one. But like you look at China's J-20 program cost, and it's like 1/100th of the price. Like 1/100th of the price of the US F-35 cost, and the F-35 is like every country that's bought it has horrendous problems with it, like because it's obviously it's like capitalist, what you call it, what's the word for that?
Planned
obsolescence, that's it. Yeah, like it's literally built to fall to pieces so that you have to buy like the Lockheed Martin screw kit to like put it back together, like for another
which costs like
$10,000 or something. Just for a screw. But like the Chinese one, they'll be like, right, well we need to screw this panel back in, and it'll just be some like fucking
some
Chinese
found in a pocket.
Some Chinese uncle with like a fucking screwdriver and like a pack of screws from the nearest corner shop, and they're like, and it'll work, like, because obviously it's not built for being a fucking capitalist export, unlike the entire US military.
If that screw means that like the tank can now operate, then it's going to operate and drive into the US's compound before they've took delivery of their Lockheed Martin screwdriver, right? That's the key difference. Now, I mean, it is illogical, but at the same time, it is logical because the US Army's set up. It's not set up to respond to these situations, is it? It's set up. It's the industrial military, the industrial military complex is set up in order to shill. What the US wants is to sign contracts with Australia.
It is like a showroom.
Yeah, they want to dump $70 million jets on Australia, right? They want Australia to have to keep buying them. They don't want Australia to actually get into any sort of combat situation with them, because then Australia is going to be like, oh, you know that $80 million jet you sold us, it got shot down by a $10 million jet from 1970, right? So they don't want that to happen. So that's why, like we said earlier on in the show, when they're faced against a conventional opponent, they got no response, because that their expensive tat is literally not built to even do that, and B, they can't even like get their expensive, because their military is so spread out across the planet now, they can't even like organise their expensive tat to get to a situation quick enough to be able to respond to it. Like they couldn't respond to that 1 hour 22 minutes where Russia just bombarded every Ukrainian airport, right? Military airport. So the US couldn't start flying in tanks, right? They can't respond to it. Same in Taiwan, right? You've got a minute to respond. If they don't respond in that minute, this is why the US is. How are they going to get?
Say the only effective military tech that the USA actually has is its aircraft carriers, and that's because they're not really actually built for export. They are meant for its power projection, its imperialism, its actual arm of imperialism. But they're only useful against fucking poor states like Iraq, where you can just park an aircraft carrier outside and start bombing the fuck out of it, and there's nothing that Iraq can do about it.
And that's only because Iraq's not got an air force, though. You've taken
but
out
then
their
China,
air force.
But then China comes out and says, right, well, we've just created a missile, one missile that costs 1,000th or 1/10,000th of the cost of one of your aircraft carriers, and it can sink your aircraft carrier. Checkmate. You've been checkmated. We have a solution to the aircraft carrier problem. So you've solved that. There's no physical way for the USA to move any forces in on China or Russia, because Russia's also, again, focuses on hypersonic anti-ship missiles. They've got their own, like the Kinzhal, the Caliber. There's another one as well that's name's avoiding me. But Russia's also learned that the main arm of US imperialism comes in the form of these fucking behemoth aircraft carriers, and everything else is just a paper tiger meant for, as you say, the showroom more than the battlefield.
Yeah, they got to sell it to Germany or whatever, because they, stick a pro-US German in Parliament, and he's going to sign the contract anyway, so you can almost just like make the price up. It's one of those like capitalism is it's proof that capitalism will kill itself, because it can't even build a military that is able to project its own power around the globe. It's like a snake, isn't it, with too many tentacles. It can't like wrap itself around fully because it's so ineffective. Just because when faced with like the Russian military, at the end of the day, when is it ever fighting, apart from when it's in Syria where it's been asked in? It's a military that is designed to fight like along the borders of Russia, right? Not like the US military, which is designed to just be a logistics program and to
deploy like for coups, basically, to help coups come along. Like, because that's all they really use their military action for. They'll
guard
bomb
some oil fields, join a coup.
Yeah.
Do
or
some
poppy
airstrikes.
fields.
Do some airstrikes.
Depending on what the commodity of the day is.
And then just run this big logistics program that also enables its own existence, right? Because otherwise all these military bases that are around the world would have to be inside the US and not being funded by US taxpayers, right? Because they can't justify it then. Once they shut all those bases down. So it's not built to actually defend or fight wars. It's just built to like exist and chill weapons. So that's why
I think like one of the largest kind of contributors to the US economy, like to the US physical numbers, the GDP per capita, the GDP, all that kind of stuff, is their armaments. So they have to justify having such a huge military industrial complex by pumping it so full of taxpayer money and then using it to shill around the world. But then you've got all these fucking tanks rotting in a tank graveyard in Arizona or something. So every so often they have to go and like destroy a small country just to show they can still do it. But as you said way earlier on in the program, like they haven't fought a conventional war against a conventional military since World War II. That was the last time that there was an actual.
That's why I said it's
near competitor.
Well, that's why I said it's strategically stupid for them to like provoke an actual response from Russia in Ukraine, because it was strategically better for the US to keep the Ukraine destabilized, because they could keep their military industrial complex running by the Ukraine threat, right? Now they've lost that. They've lost that ball. That ball's been taken back off them, and now Russia's in charge of what happens, right? And shit will just get done, and they'll be left to cope, just like they did in Crimea, just like they did in Korea, just like they did in Venezuela, just like they did in Vietnam, just like they did when the Bolsheviks won the Russian Civil War. You know, all these examples where, just like Iraq, right? As soon as they withdraw, Afghanistan, as soon as they withdraw, everything gets undone within like a week because nobody wanted them there in the first place. Right, anyway, let me finish looking at these comments before we wrap up. Okay, so there's some of the lies. Kiev independent, quote unquote Kiev independent, said he's at 49 kills. A MiG-29 against these modern Russian jets. Yeah, exactly. A MiG-29, which is from the USSR times. It's like the last jet of the USSR, isn't it?
1980s.
No, it's 1990. 1990 or even 1991 possibly. The MiG-29 came out, I believe.
Really? That late?
Yeah, like literally. I mean, it would be development in the 80s, but I think it was first.
No, 1983. 1983.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
1983. So yeah,
Still.
so it's like what, 40 years old, 45 years old.
And that's taken on what, SU? What's the planes that it's
35s.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Like the most modernized 4++ fighter jet in the world that is
And I mean-
capable of going toe to toe with like American F-22s. They think
Yeah.
that it's fuck off.
And also, remember that video, like at the very first outbreak of what was blatantly a Ukrainian plane somehow shooting at the ground, which just disappeared because obviously it was a Ukrainian plane, right? So it's not just.
Oh yeah, the one that was like shooting at fucking houses.
Well, looked like it, yeah.
Yeah, and then we didn't hear any more about that. That is interesting. I'd actually forgotten about that one because it just disappeared off the radar so quickly. Pardon the pun.
Yeah. Anything else? I got banned from Twitter for posting the Zelensky clip where he mass shoots everyone in Parliament. It's a clip from his Netflix movie. That's ridiculous. Got banned from Twitter for posting a Zelensky clip.
I don't know what to say. Zircon. That was the missile I was thinking of. Yeah, Zircon.
Yeah, Jenny says apparently Telegram is censoring banning too. Yes, Telegram. Apparently the Telegram. From what I've heard, I'm not confirmed, but apparently the Telegram owner doesn't like RT, so the RT channels keep getting banned on there as well. But I think that's like on his own whim, which it only seems to be RT channels though that are getting picked off.
There's a lot of stuff on Telegram, like it's got very varied like political stances, hasn't it? There's a lot of fucking QAnon supporters and COVID deniers and all that kind of stuff used to use Telegram because of its like supposed free speech platform. So like I doubt that they'd be censoring anything about the war or anything like that. And ASB is still going strong on there.
Monica says we forgot to tell her that we were streaming. We didn't forget. It was like a really last minute stream because we weren't going to do a show this week anyway. So but we just decided to do like an hour stream and it got done. We were live within 5 minutes. So there you go. The biggest far-right movements are in Europe and America's backyard. The biggest neo-Nazi movements are in Europe and America's backyards, but there are plenty, like I say, there are plenty of fascists in Idlib in Syria. There are plenty of fascists in South America, right? Running around beheading communists, etc., etc. There are even ones in Chile, is it? There are lots of fascists in Chile with German names, surprisingly.
A lot of South American states have huge fascist movements. I mean, look at Brazil. Like they've had fucking Bolsonaro in there for how long now?
People talking about Wagner Group or Wagner Group. How would you say it? Wagner Group. It reminds me of that guy off you're British, Tom. Yeah, Wagner. Anyway,
yeah.
Wagner Group is real and pretty Nazi, right? Well, Escher did a thread on that. Apparently it's like bullshit, yeah, like Jenny mentions it, yeah. So go check that out on Historically.
There was also an article by foreignpolicy.com, which is it's an American liberal newspaper, right? And they did a headline titled "The Wagner Group and Why It Isn't Real." and it was basically talking about how the Wagner Group is essentially like an umbrella term used in Russia to refer to like fascists in Russia, like which, and obviously no one's denying that Russia has fascists. Every ex-Soviet state has a large number of fascists because they were used to help dismantle the Soviet Union essentially. So like it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of fascists in Russia, but
there definitely are. I mean, remember that Euromaidan documentary that me, you, and Sammy watched, and it like explained the roots.
Ukraine on Fire.
Not Ukraine on Fire. It was a different one. It was the one it was that Russian documentary that we watched ages ago, and it like a timeline of Euromaidan, and even that doc covers it. That like Russian neo-Nazis were on the side, because it shows you like a post that Right Sector put up at the time of Euromaidan where they're like thanking all these Russian neo-Nazi groups for their support,
getting involved.
Yeah, and then there's like an interview with one of these Right Sector guys, and he's saying like, oh yeah, we're gonna unite with all the right wingers in Russia and start like an anti-Putin bloc in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, right? So, I mean, they do exist, but funnily enough, they're on the side of each other. I think somebody said
remember all that shit with the protests in Belarus recently as well, and there was a significant number of like Nazis coming out who were all Azov-loving freaks. Remember the guy who, when he sent the fucking MiG up to ground the Ryanair flight? That was one of the fucking funniest things out. remember when he did that? That was so fucking based.
Yeah, there was a guy on Carl's Space. The second one I think Carl did that was talking about like global fascism, and he was saying that like there definitely is like a global fascist union, right? And they all do sort of work together. So this argument that like, oh, Ukraine can't have Nazis because Russia has Nazis as well. Well, yeah, they both have Nazis, right? And they're both working together in order to like try and make the entire world fascist. So it would probably be in the interests of humanity to try and stop them everywhere, right? Instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna like argue them down a little bit. You should probably be against them by default. That's what I'm trying to get at. I mean, I know my great granddad was when he left Britain to liberate France, right?
Yeah, and my granddad on my dad's side, like he was, he fought in France as well, fighting behind occupied French lines, making maps and shit. Like, you know, everyone in Britain's got a story, unless their fucking granddad was a Nazi.
But everybody in America has that as well, because America joined the side of the Allies and fought against Nazi Germany. So, like, never again is a statement that should apply to every country that was part of the Allies, really, right? That's how it should go. And that's it, basically.
Any more questions?
No, have you got anything you want to say before we finish up?
No, not particularly. We'll just have to keep an eye on the situation as it unfolds, and obviously to everyone in the chat, I know everyone who's listening to us already is fairly geopolitically well aware and knows what to do and stuff, but just do keep your eyes peeled, because there's so much fucking propaganda suffusing the airwaves at the minute, so much censorship as well, so be careful what you say. Say things,
I mean, as of right now as well, is because there's like a real overbearing attack on free speech at the minute, right? Carry on.
Yeah, that's it. So just everyone keep your eyes peeled, be very careful for propaganda, keep your eyes out, and be careful what you say, just because, as you say, there's a lot of censorship going on at the minute. For the most mildly dissenting of views, I mean, you can't even post videos of Zelensky in his own movies anymore, apparently. That's sufficient to get you censored. So coming from somebody who's been censored by America over 15 times now, be careful what you say. because it's serious. It's getting hot out there.
Yeah, and I guess like be more like Majoro, right? And tell the US to just go fuck itself.
Fuck off.
Yeah, like he did this week.
I just wanted to point out one last thing before we go as well. That after Majoro told the USA to go fuck itself, the USA came out and said, we do still support Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. So
is that after they've begged Venezuela to buy?
Yeah, after he
give
fucked them
oil?
off. After he fucked them off. So so that's why my Twitter name is currently Tom Guaido.
But also, right? If you're like in the West, and it always seems depressing, right? It always seems like the world's a depressing place. Just realise that Majoro is telling the US to go fuck itself, right? And the US has no response to that, apart from to turn around and say this bell end that they've been paying to say is the president.
Oh shit!
That's like the kind of stuff that used to get you locked up in like a
an asylum.
Hospital. Yeah, exactly. Going around saying you're the president of places, but somehow that's just their response to things these days. So anyway, yeah.
Fucking hell.
Thanks for listening this week. Don't forget to tune in. Hopefully next Thursday we should be back with Escher. We had a week off last week as well. We'll see what score is with that. We should be back on. What else? We've got to do the advertising. Thanks to Mass Casualty for rejoining his membership. I'm going to use him as advertising. If you want to join our membership, you can. The link is below. Click membership. It's like something a month, a couple of quid. You get like merch discount, and you also help support us, in the face of all this, mass censorship and one-sided bias. So, we've got no funding, so the way to help us is like that. So much appreciated if you can join our membership. If that's not your thing, we've got a Patreon that you can join. There's some tiers on there. I recommend, because I'm from Yorkshire and I'm a cheapskate, and I'm sure Tom will agree, you join that cheapest one.
Mm-hmm.
And you get access to our Discord, and when we've got like guests on, you can come and hang out with them afterwards on the show, and that's your perk. You also get merch discount, all sorts, to get on there. Don't forget, join our Telegram, t.me/MangoPress. Get in there now. Jenny's saying we'll get on Odyssey. We'll check that out. We've got a few things in the works, Jenny, so look out for that. We've got merch as well. You can get some of our merch on Teespring, I believe. We put out this t-shirt. If you buy this Jivvy t-shirt, we'll donate some of the profits to charities in Donbass after the war, right? Once everything's settled down, we'll donate to humanitarian charities over there. So go check that out. And that's it. That's it for this week. Sammy went earlier because he's gone out night clubbing because he's,
Has he actually?
That's how much he loves the people who join his Patreon, I guess. Yeah, I think he has, Tom. Shameful, right?
Such a bad Muslim.
And on that note, on that bombshell, yeah, we'll be back next week. See you later. Thanks for tuning in.
See you later, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.